Our next speaker is beloved by anti-imperialists everywhere. He is a former detective with a sharp, investigative mind. He's a famous radio show host and a prolific streamer. I look forward to his streams every day. He's a brilliant political analyst, wherein he knows how to tell us about the most annoying and unbelievably idiotic move by our Western leaders in a relaxed, funny, wise, and zen way. Please put your hands together for Garland Nixon.
Thank you. For most people know I've never claimed a particular ideology. I'll say I'm a lefty, but here I often refer to a person that I learned so much from, my mentor. You might have heard of him, Paul Robeson Jr. So I kind of let you know the kind of direction I'm leaning, I'm just saying. Never claimed anything similar to Paul Robeson. But at any rate, misinformation is really an important thing to talk about now. For this reason, you have to understand what misinformation is in our society today. You have to have a definition. Anything you start with, if you're writing a law, whatever, you must start with definitions, right? And I believe that many people in our society are confused about this issue because they don't understand the current definition of misinformation. I'll tell you what I think it is. The bottom line is, how do you view reality? What is reality? You can have the philosophical discussion of reality. Is it what you believe? Is it what you can touch, etc.? And we have a technocratic group of the neocons, the technocrats, and to them, reality is based on a consensus. We get a bunch of people together, we come up with a narrative, whatever it is, we get a consensus of the people in our group, and we say, boom, that's our reality. It is a consensus-based reality. It's not based on what's true, false, whether you can touch it, whether you believe it. We come up with a consensus that works for whatever it is we want to accomplish. Misinformation, disinformation is anything that disproves the consensus. And that's what confuses people, because we think misinformation or disinformation is related to truth. Is it true? Is it false? Is it provable? Is it all these kinds of things we think about? And so we get confused when they say, well, that's misinformation. And we're like, well, that's true. And then they come up with terms, malinformation, misinformation. And then they've got the definitions for all of them. They're all kind of designed to confuse us. But when you understand what you're up against, misinformation is anything that pushes against a reality, a narrative that is based on a consensus. And it's not a scientific consensus. Again, when we think about a consensus, well, how do we come up with a consensus? Well, we look at what we can prove and what we can't, what data we have, what information we have, and we can all come up with a consensus, right? Consensus. Is Caleb Maupin a werewolf? Well, you're going to ask questions. Well, do werewolves exist? Are there such things? We got to ask questions like that. And in the end, we're like, well, it doesn't appear to anything to be such thing as a werewolf. So I guess the answer is no. Whereas this group would come together and they'd say, well, if Caleb was a werewolf, that would really benefit us, wouldn't it? Because then nobody would follow. Nobody would go where he said. They'd run. If the moon came out, they'd run for their lives, right? So if Caleb were a werewolf, regardless of whether or not they exist, it would benefit our narrative. Therefore, we've all come to the conclusion that Caleb is a werewolf. And we're going to put information out everywhere. Caleb's a werewolf. And anyone who either says he's not a werewolf or even questions the existence of werewolves, misinformation, malinformation, disinformation. And when you understand that, you don't have to be confused anymore, and you don't have to, you know what you're fighting against now. You're not fighting against the true or false or provable. You're simply fighting against people who have come up with a self-serving consensus. Because when we think of consensus, we think of science, a scientific consensus. A self-serving consensus. Anything outside of that, anything that, particularly if it's true, that's the worst kind of misinformation, the kind that's true, because that's the hardest to fight against. So okay, so that being said, the question becomes, how do we fight against misinformation? Right? Because now when we talk about misinformation, people outside of that technocratic neocon group, we're really talking about things that are false, things that are misleading, things that attempt to misdirect people away from the truth. That's what we're talking about. We talk about misinformation. We got data, and you get frustrated because you come out with, you write it down. Here you go. Boom. Here's my data. Here's my information, empirical evidence, and people just, that's misinformation. I'm gonna have to look. How do you know? Because I've been told it came from a socialist. It has to be. It was on RT. Who'd read RT? It's got to be all lies, right? They've already been set. They've been given the heroes and the villains. If it comes from this person or this group, well, they're villains. You certainly can't listen to this. So they've been programmed. Understanding that people have been programmed, you have to be, we're going to call, let's just call this countering. We'll use their own language. Countering misinformation. But we're using it in a realistic sense. When you're countering misinformation, you understand that you can't take it head on. Because people believe things, unfortunately now, people have been taken away from believing things as a matter of evidence or fact to believing things as an act of faith. We're a member of this group. My group believes this. We got a list of good guys and bad guys, of heroes and villains. If it comes from Tucker Carlson, or it's wrong. If it comes from whoever, Joy Ann Reid, then it's right. They have a set of beliefs that are concrete that they cannot veer from. And you get this. I've gotten people. Sounds like you listen to fill in the blank. Fox News. Where'd you get that from? RT. Well, and what difference, in reality, my mind says, what difference would it make where I got it from? Either it's true or false, either it's provable or not, but you're not in that world when you think like that. So you can't fight, in Zen, there's so many sayings, but one of them is the tiger and the shark can never fight because there's no common ground, right? One of them's not on the ground, so that ain't gonna work real well. So when you're trying to fight misinformation and you are in that, you are caught up in the realm that they live in, you're wasting your time. They're just going to say, you got it from this person. Where'd you get it from? So you can't take it head on. Here's something that I believe in, and this is what I found that works very well for me recently. It's something, again, I learned from Paul Robeson Jr. He used to say this, Garland, you can't teach people things. You have to make them think they learned it themselves. There's a tree there. For whatever reason, that's a conservative or a liberal or a socialist tree. So you can't say that's a tree. That's a tree. Get out of here. Where'd you learn that from? Fox News, RT or something, for God's sake. Whatever, right? But what you can do is say, man, that's an interesting thing there. Yeah. Looks like it has, what's that, bark? Yeah, that's bark. How's it down on the ground around that? I think it's roots. Some funny green things in the wind. Leaves. I wonder what. And they say, yeah, that looks like a tree. Really? That's a tree. What do you know? You can't take them head on because there's so many, people are given so many barriers from reality. They're given barriers from the truth. It didn't come from the right person. It didn't come from the right outlet. Didn't come at the right time of day. They always have some reason. They're given so many reasons not to accept alternative perspectives. What I have found recently, and I think this is important, the most successful thing I found is simply to point out contradictions and get out of the way. Just because you can't get in fights with people. The other thing is when they get in a fight, people dig their heels in. It's, I'm wrong, your group is wrong. Now they're not just defending themselves. I'm a member of the Democratic Party. I'm a member of this group. I'm now defending my group. If I'm wrong, my whole group is wrong. And now, not only am I wrong, and if I accept something that's wrong, then I would have to go back and face my group. And now I'm in real trouble because I know that everybody in my group believes something and I don't think it's true and I know it's wrong. Do I simply go back and just say, I'm just going to ignore the fact that I know it? That's like the worst situation a person can be in, is to go back to their meeting of the Democrats or the Republican Party and have something that they know is false. I had years ago when I was young, I had a friend who, right after I got out of high school, and she'd moved here from Arkansas, and she told me, here's the story. The town that she grew up in, everybody was a Republican, and her father was the sheriff, and he was a Democrat. And he pretended like he was a Republican. And her family were all Democrats, right? But everybody in the town thought he was a Republican because he wouldn't fit in. He couldn't, in that town in Arkansas, he couldn't very well say, I don't believe what everybody else says. And that's the dilemma that people have. Part of it is the information that they're taking in. The other part of it is the reality that they have social circles, that they don't want to go back to their friends and be ostracized because they say, well, you know, I listened to a bunch of socialists and they said, you know, it's probably better off if maybe the government looks out for the people every now and then. Get out of here. What's wrong with you? You're crazy. And now they've lost their friends. They've lost their relationships. People are horrified of that. They'd rather be lied to. What they really would prefer is that they don't know. And when you come to them and you present things to them and you do it forcefully and you do it assertively, it's because you have passion and you believe in it. Well, you ever notice this? It just makes them madder. Yeah. You're like, well, what about this? And boy, if it's something that really makes sense and is absolutely true, then they are infuriated. How dare you? You know, the worst thing you could do is give somebody the truth. They don't want it. So what I found, going back again to so many things I learned from Paul Robeson Jr., was the best thing to do. Here's what I've been doing. I did a show last night. Marie, my dear friend, sitting right there, and she listened to WPFW. Some people listen to it. And I listened to the news about Biden's protecting our soldiers. You know, he's bombed somewhere in Syria because he's got to protect our soldiers, you know, and everybody's like, wow, yeah, protect our soldiers. That's a good thing. So I went on and I thought, I'm going to point out some issues here. I'm not going to say he's wrong. How dare you protect our shoulders? Or maybe you should, or maybe you shouldn't. Let me just throw some things out here. How come nobody asked why our soldiers are there? Yeah. And then I said, well, look, and I didn't say, I'm going to prove that they shouldn't be there. I said, let me read an article to you from Reuters, from whatever, blah, 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 where Donald Trump said, we're there to protect the oil. We like the oil. We're keeping the oil, right? You know, and I didn't take a position. This is wrong, right? We shouldn't be there. Blah, blah. I said, here's a piece of information. What do you think about that? You know, and that's the show I did. You know, here's something where, you know, whatever, a member of Congress introduced a bill and said, let me read the bill to you. And it said, we should not be illegally occupying Syria. And I'm like, that's a member of Congress. So I introduced tidbits of information and fact. I didn't run head on into somebody and say we should, we shouldn't. Here's an interesting fact. You know, to me, the brain is kind of like a pair of biker shorts. A pair of biker shorts, they're kind of tight. They fit real tight, right? And if you start gaining a few pounds and they stretch and stretch and stretch, and after a while, if they stretch but so big, even if you lose the weight, the biker shorts will never come back to where they were before. And if you give people certain pieces of information, no matter how hard they try, they can't lose those pieces of information. And when somebody says something to them later about, yeah, we blah, blah, blah in Syria, in the back of their mind is, oh, yeah, that's an illegal occupation. We're not supposed to be there. And it was in Reuters and the Washington Post and the New York Times. So a lot of times when you give people, when you're fighting disinformation, when you give people solid pieces of information, not too complicated too, you want something hard-hitting and very simple that they can't forget no matter how hard they try. No matter, they can say, I hate you, I'm not listening to you, and they walk away. And afterwards, the real reason they're mad at you is not because you came after them and you made them mad. It's because you gave them something, you know, kind of like something sticking to your shoe. You just can't get rid of it.
That's great.
You know, so it is a way of addressing things without coming head on, without slamming into them. Just give somebody something and walk away. You're not confronting them. I went on about Syria, and then I demonstrated some contradictions, a very important word. We use the word hypocrisy, which is a great word to use amongst us, right? And we know it's clearly hypocrisy, but at the foundation of the term hypocrisy is always a contradiction. So when you are trying to, because what I'm talking about is talking to people who you disagree with, maybe don't want to hear what you have to say, right? With them, well, amongst us, we can use the word hypocrisy all day, but with them, you can't, because again, it's confrontational. They'll push back. Hey, are you calling me a hypocrite, or the people that I believe in a bunch of hypocrites? How dare you, right? Instead, a contradiction is something that's kind of benign. Well, isn't this kind of odd, huh? Here's some fact and here's a fact. They don't seem to match up. I wonder why. You can ask them, I wonder why. Isn't this weird, right? So in doing that on my show last night, a couple of things. Wow, it's clearly demonstrated through several different articles that the United States is illegally occupying Syria, right? We're there. What about the territorial integrity? Then I read a statement by Joe Biden that talked about respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And of course, I did kind of throw in, I said, now we did kind of overthrow the government and put in a puppet government, but no, that's not important right now. I just kind of slipped that one in. Every now and then you throw an elbow, slip that one in. Like, it's kind of like I used to play basketball a lot. Every now and then when the ref ain't looking, you hit the guy with an elbow, and then he pushes you back, and the ref throws that throws him out for, But at any rate, but my point is, but I did mention, we did overthrow the government and what have you. Just kind of slip that in there. But the point being that, well, there's a contradiction. Clearly, based on what I just read in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, in Reuters, and on and on and on, based on what I just gave you, we are illegal. And by the way, I read something else. As soon as Joe Biden was elected, I read an article, and that was from Newsweek, I believe, and it said the first thing that the Syrian government has said to Joe Biden is, we'd like you to leave and stop stealing our oil. And then I read a recent comment by the Chinese government. You need to leave and stop stealing our oil. And of course, then I have to add again, Donald Trump. We're staying in Syria. We're taking the oil. So I have not gone after anybody, but I've driven home a point. We're there. We're taking their oil. They've asked us to leave. The Chinese has asked us to leave, and we're there. If you're listening to that show, you now realize we're there, and we got no right to be there, and we're taking their oil. That point is done. There's nothing. Tucker Carlson can't come into the conversation. RT, none of it. That's there. And then I go to Ukraine. Independence, sovereignty. There's a contradiction there. Then I bring up, I got another article, and I'm doing this to show you just kind of the technique I use. Got another article here. I read this article. The United States says that if the Solomon Islands decide to allow a base from China, we won't rule out military action. Again, we have a contradiction, don't we? We've drawn a red line around the Solomon Islands, 7,341 miles from the shores of the United States. So I'm adding things in here. Well, that's interesting. So we can pump weapons into Ukraine on Russia's border. We can pump weapons into China, which is literally inside of China. But the Solomon Islands, we're saying to them, if you allow a base built, we'll kill you. That's pretty much what we're saying. So what's my point on all of this? I am not arguing with someone. I'm not pushing back against anything. I'm not saying I'm right and I'm wrong. I'm giving you some information that clearly demonstrates contradictions. Now, when you leave, you have to work those contradictions out in your brain, don't you? You can't argue with me, well, that's Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is not in your brain. He's gone. He's doing his thing. RT, you didn't even read RT. You don't even like RT. You don't know what's in it, but you know it's wrong. And I do, and this is, I think, critical. One of the things that's important whenever I can, I try to find this information in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in Reuters, because that heads them off at the pass before they can say, aha, that came from Sputnik or Press TV or whatever. I'd find it there. There you go. This is from mainstream media. And then I present the contradiction because I'm not trying to win. One of the problems that we have in countering misinformation, right, is that it becomes a personal confrontation between two people, and we're trying to win. We got to prove that we're right, and we got to prove that they're wrong. And that's not powerful, because ultimately it just becomes who can dig their heels in better and throw the most punches. And then you'll see people do things. So I was talking to somebody earlier, and they were saying that, you know, when somebody says, oh, yeah, that's whataboutism. And that's one of the things you get when you're going head-to-head with somebody, because it doesn't really mean anything. You know, think about it, that's whataboutism. What is whataboutism? There's no definition for that. I don't know what it means. And they said, what do you say when somebody says it's whataboutism? And I say, yeah, it's possible, but let me get back to my point. You know, in Zen, the term is somebody throws a rock down a well and they don't hear a splash, right? They didn't say it's whataboutism because it's whataboutism, because they don't even know what the definition of it is. I don't, neither do you. What they meant was, I got to put up a stop sign. And whataboutism means you're saying something that I don't know how to deal with, and I'm getting confused. And if I say it's whataboutism, we can now discuss whether or not it's even proper for us to have this conversation. Whether it's proper to have the point, not the point, whether it's even proper to introduce this particular point into, you know, what are we getting into Robert's Rules of Orders, for God's sake? Do we need somebody to do like a second or something? It was kind of like, a lot of people know I was on the board of directors for the National Security, excuse me, that was a slip, for the ACLU for years. And they'd say, what was it like? I'd say, in a room full of lawyers, you're sitting there for, 20 minutes arguing whether to use a comma or a semicolon, you know? And that's that, but that's what an argument between two people eventually devolves into. Especially if you, and I'll use this term loosely, especially if you're winning. If your points are solid and the person doesn't want to accept them, they got to put up stop signs. That's whataboutism. Oh, yeah, you're only saying that because you want fill in the blank. Oh, yeah, you got that from Tucker Carlson. All of those things, to me, are signs that say two things. Number one, it's very uncomfortable for you right now, and you want to change the subject. Number two, I'm doing something wrong because I've given you the opportunity to play the game. I am now in an argument with you. I'm not in a discussion. So to me, countering misinformation is, to me, it's like, and Caleb, you've done it, plenty of people have done it. It's like handing out somebody a leaflet or a piece of paper. Hey, you know what? I got something you might want to read. Well, I don't know. Here, take this with you. Read it later. You're not going to read it to them right then. Here, take it with you, read it later, whatever it is. It could be something about socialism. The next person, it could be, have you accepted so-and-so as your savior? Whatever it is, they're leaving it with somebody, and you hope that maybe the person reads it one day, that they take it with them. But this is something much more powerful, because guess what? In this instance, you've already read the pamphlet to them. So you have a discussion, and you point out contradictions. Make sure that you don't argue with people. You don't put people in a position, because you don't give them anything to swing at. If we're arguing, yeah, there we go. I presented a target, you punch, and now we argue it. We're, as they say in Zen, you worry, and then you get worried about worrying. And then it's all downhill from there, right? We're arguing, and now we're arguing about the concept of arguing and whether it's valid to introduce various points of the argument, as opposed to, this is an interesting contradiction, isn't it? Yeah. Talk to you later. Have a nice day. Maybe when you see them later, you ask them. Maybe not. It doesn't matter, because there's nothing they can do to escape it. And I think that's the important thing about countering misinformation. It is patience and confidence. Right? Patience and confidence to understand that planting seeds with people of information, of different things. And then and now I'm going to go to something else, and this is important. How about those people in Paris, huh? This is about saying, and something that Paul Robeson Jr. would say to me, because, you think about a movement. I need to start a movement. Things have got to change. When are they going to change? How are we going to change things? And one thing he would say is, Change, Garland, is not about the information you give people and all of that. It's about timing. It's about when things are right, people are ready for change. You could talk to the people in Paris for hundreds of years. When they had enough, they're going to go to the street and start lighting some cars on fire. And no matter how much you say, I remember, I've harassed them on Twitter. You people voted for Macron. What do you think? You had other options, right? Sure, okay. But at some point, Macron and that government showed them, we don't work for you. We don't listen to you. We're not interested in you. That you had the illusion of democracy is no longer required. And at that point, the timing was right. And all of the talk that people had given, they didn't even need it. They're just mad and they're on the streets. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I know that the timing was right. So you give people information, and now what's happening? Look at the banks. Look at the banks. 2008, all over again on steroids, staring us in the face. Yeah. And they're just, everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. We got this covered. What do you do? We just print more money and throw it in there. And hey, look, Putin over there. Right? Yeah, exactly. Aliens, balloons. There's scary stuff everywhere, for God's sake. But don't look at the banks. Now, what does that mean? That means that some of the people that you've given information to or that you talk to now might listen that wouldn't listen before. Some of the people that you said, this capitalist system, this neoliberal self-serving capitalism that we have has morphed into something really, really ugly, which inevitably it probably would have morphed into anyway. But this is what it is. And it is nothing but a self-serving racket. And we have a system that does nothing but extracts money from the working class and the poor and gives it to the billionaires. Nah, get out of here, you stinking stupid socialist. I don't know, I'm gonna listen to you. And now they're screaming it at you. But they remember that you said there's something wrong with this system. But no matter how many times you told them, when they're sitting out there at the cafe, they're drinking their wine, they're getting in their nice little cars, they're shopping, buying their clothes, they're saving up so they can buy their Rolex. Because eventually they got to have the Rolex. They save after a couple of years. Now they got a shiny watch to show off with people. And they've all the things they're thinking about they can do to look like they're part of the upper class, to feel like they're part of the upper class. Right? They're doing all of this stuff, and they really believe that things are going to work out well for them. And they wake up one day, and they realize you told them what this system was going to do eventually, and now it's doing it. The time is right. So that also is part of what I was talking about, is having the confidence and patience to say to people, here's a contradiction. Boom, boom. Look at that. That's a bunch of foolishness. Okay. And walk away and leave. Because sooner or later, if you are right, if you really believe you're right, reality is going to teach them. And they'll still have that and they'll remember, man, I remember a long time, that darn Caleb Maupin has been saying this for I don't know how long. God, I hate that guy. Because they're mad at you because now they know you're right. Right? So, oh, man, he's been telling us this system's going to crash. And what do you know? And he's been telling us how it's going to crash. And he's been telling us why it's going to crash. And now, even they may not even call Caleb or anybody here and say you were right. They're pissed and they're angry. And they do know why. So countering misinformation to me is about patience, right? It's about having something that we don't usually think about, and that's having confidence in people. That if you give them the right information, they'll find the right way. It'll come to them sooner or later. That's what I think is important. Now, the last thing I'll say is about, and this is relative to that also. People might have heard my ship pushing story, but I always use it because I made it up. And I got to use it. I don't want it to, just float away from me. And that is, how do we continue when things seem dark and bleak and scary ahead? How do we keep doing it? And the fact that I always think about like W.E.B. Du Bois and people like that who 100 and some years ago, let's say they were fighting for the freedom of black people and fair treatment, that they weren't even getting in their lifetime, no possible chance of getting that in their lifetime, but they did it anyway and they kept fighting for it. And now people read their books. Wow, what about this guy? Look what this person did. And in instances, read Marcus Garvey, what happened? And they locked him up. The system went after him and he kept doing what he could do. Why? My story of the ship pushing guy is somebody walks down to the dock one day and they see this guy, he's standing there and there's a gigantic ship and he's on there and he's just pushing it for all he's worth. They look at him. Hey, look at this guy. And they watch him and he pushes and nothing happens, of course. And they walk over to him and they're like, look, dude, I don't know how to tell you this. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I think you're out of your mind. You can push and push and push. You're never going to move that ship. It's too big. It's just not going to happen. And he says, well, I know that. Well, then what do you do? And he says, it's my hobby. I'm a ship pusher. It's just what I do. I don't necessarily expect the ship to move. I just like to push on ships. Gets me in shape, loosens up the old back muscles. You should try it sometime. Why do I say that? That's a kind of Zen thing, right? Why does he do it? He does it because he likes to do it and he enjoys it. And then nobody else has to understand why he does it. And if it's successful and one of these days a ship moves, all the better. And that's what I say to everyone here. And that's how you can be the happy activist. You do what you do because you're amongst friends. You enjoy it. You get together with people. Sometimes you get together and you have a meal or you hang out or you chat about what you're doing or what you talk on the phone, whatever, right? You enjoy what you're doing. So you're not frustrated because it's not happening fast enough. You don't know nothing's ever going to work. We're all doomed. No. You enjoy the time that you're having, you enjoy what you're doing, and you do it because it's who you are, it's what you stand for, it's a part of you. You're not actually even doing anything. It's just who you are expressing itself to the universe. And you'll never get frustrated and angry because it's not happening fast enough. Because it's always happening. Anytime you're doing it, it's happening. The process of doing it is it happening. That's right. Thanks a lot, everybody.